All right, hello everyone. Again, this is Yanisa with Public Spend Forum. We're just about ready to get started, so I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Ash, who is part of our PSF team and who will be moderating the webinar. Ash?
Thank you, Yanisa. Hi everyone, and welcome again to the webinar and panel discussion today on advice from experts and suppliers on how to structure RFPs for public procurement technology. We have a very interesting and fun panel discussion set up for today. I'm the moderator. My name is Ash Beatty again. I'm a managing director at Public Spend Forum. And very shortly, I'll ask each of the three panel members to introduce themselves. The panel members come with significant expertise in the public sector in working with public sector buyers of procurement technology, as well as in working in the public sector on public policy and public procurement issues across organizations, ranging from the U.S. to Europe to Asia. So I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves individually in just a moment once we get started with the actual panel discussion. Also on the, as part of the discussion, I may have some colleagues from Public Spend Forum that weigh in from time to time at various points in the discussion. We're going to keep it very fluid and largely informal, but I'll tee up the discussion topics in just a moment. To begin with, many of you may already be familiar with Public Spend Forum. We're a market intelligence and best practices platform. We help government programs and buyers as well as suppliers in the public sector in various ways, with the goal being to accelerate impact. Our three areas of focus are market and supplier intelligence, best practices tools and data, as well as global community and an expert network. In fact, this panel discussion is a means of both addressing some best practice areas as well as bringing together the community in a discussion to exchange perspectives and come out with some constructive ideas on the topic that we're discussing today. A little bit more about Public Spend Forum. Our best practice areas cover three topics: procurement technology, which is the focus of the webinar today, more specifically on how to structure RFPs. And in addition to procurement technology, we also have two other topics of key focus most immediately, that being workforce competency and skills and public procurement measurement and management. With respect to our coverage of procurement technology, there's several things that we're doing, only one of which is the webinars and the webinar series that we're having today. But we have lots of other elements to our coverage, including a public procurement technology market intelligence brief, which you can find on our website. Shortly, we have an online directory of procurement technology vendors, which I'll be talking about at the end of this discussion, and a couple of other areas. I won't go into each one individually, but just to tee up that we have several areas of coverage with respect to procurement technology that can really help you in understanding the market, the suppliers, as well as some tools to help you get started or move forward in your trek for procurement technology procurement. Now, this particular webinar is part of a series. It's a how-to-buy series for procurement technology. We're actually covering several themes in this series, things such as how to get started, understanding the market, how best to engage the market, how to structure a contract, how to manage performance. So themes like that is what we plan on covering as part of this series. This particular webinar panel discussion is the second in the series. The first one was more so focused on getting started in a procurement technology procurement. You can find that available on our website at publicspendforum.net. Some of the key themes motivating this panel discussion, this particular webinar, some of the key questions that teed up us having this particular topic are things like how to get the best suppliers that come to the table for any opportunity, and more specifically, what you can do vis-a-vis the RFP to support that. The second one being, how can government give suppliers an opportunity to put forth their best foot in terms of bringing the most innovative solution to the table, or at least positioning themselves in the most innovative way that can help you as a buying organization achieve your ultimate goals and outcomes. And then third, what issues do suppliers and experts see in government procurement related to buying procurement tech, and what do they recommend constructively to improve the process and the outcomes? So these were the three key themes motivating this particular panel discussion. And I'll pause for a second and just point out that we'll be providing this recording as well as a write-up of the key takeaways that we discussed today. It'll be available on our website, and you should be able to access that shortly after today, in the next week or so. So to get started, I'm going to ask the panel members to introduce themselves. You can see the topics that we have teed up here. We'll begin with a discussion around what makes for a good customer interaction from a supplier perspective and from the perspective of just general experts in the industry itself and in public procurement, that is. More specifically, then we'll talk about what makes a good RFP. The fourth topic on here, more broadly, what are some of the challenges that we see in the public sector as part of procurement technology buying? And then finally, we want to very constructively conclude with recommendations for public sector professionals engaged in buying procurement technology. What can they do differently? So I'm going to ask the panel members to introduce themselves. Andy, let's begin with you.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning, depending upon where you are in the country here. My name is Andy Millay. I'm the Vice President for Coupa Software's Public Sector Practice. My background and I guess my qualifications for being on this panel is I've been in the public sector procurement, ERP, and other administrative systems as a provider for quite a long time. Most recently, most of the stuff that I've been working with is with cloud-based software as a service solutions. Prior to my role at Coupa, I ran the public sector practice for IBM's Workday practice. And just a few words about Coupa. I know there's probably plenty of people on the call here that don't know Coupa or are not familiar with us, but we deliver a cloud-based spend management solution, and we're a software as a service provider, but we see ourselves more as a value as a service provider. And we help our customers achieve that value through cost savings and operational improvements by helping them maximize their spend under management and providing the visibility and control they need over their budgetary dollars. We do this by using a comprehensive unified solution coupled with the best commercial business practices. And not only do our customers believe we are the best available solution, but the industry analysts out there also agree. Those analysts such as Gartner, IDC, and Forrester all rate us in the top in their annual reports and in their Magic Quadrants. So just a little bit about us. My intent as we go through today is really to touch base on some of the experiences I've had over the years in working with public sector procurements, as well as some of the challenges that we face with today's modern system. So I look forward to the discussion.
Great, thanks, Andy. Colin?
Good day, this is Colin Jones. I am the public sector lead for Evalua, an e-procurement solutions provider. Hopefully the value I bring today is I've been working in the public sector with public sector clients of all entities, state, local, higher education for over 17 years. The last 7 of which have been spent working with procurement offices, again, of all shapes and sizes across the country in different states, Wisconsin, large university systems, as well as, again, small cities, private universities, et cetera. Responded to probably over 50 solicitations at a minimum, probably more than I can count. So hopefully I can bring a perspective from the procurement provider to the states, and having responded to actually close to over 10 e-procurement solution RFPs over the last 7 years, bring some perspective as far as that's concerned and help those on the other side and those procurement officers be able to prepare so that we can respond and provide better quality responses to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Colin. Eliza?
Good afternoon. My name is Eliza Niewiadomska. I work for European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in London. EBRD is a transition bank, as we call it, working in all former Soviet Union countries, and most recently also in North Africa and Middle East. So basically our region starts in Mongolia and ends in Morocco. I'm a public procurement lawyer and serve on a team responsible for policy advice to governments implementing structural reforms. My role is to help with procurement, with designing the new regulatory framework, but also implementation package. And this is where electronic procurement comes, as we see it now as perhaps the most important part of getting it right. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Eliza, and thanks everybody for introducing yourself. Next topic. Okay, we'll spend a little bit of time teeing up this panel discussion, talking about public sector customer opportunities. And really the theme here is, as suppliers and advisors to public procurement, What can you share with us about how you decide in terms of which customers to work with, which customers position themselves in such a way that they're best able to achieve their desired outcomes, and those kinds of themes. So, Andy, why don't we begin with you?
Sure, and actually, before I get started, I just want to make sure that the attendees understand that when we talk about some of the things that we see as improvements to the process, I also clearly understand the challenges that you go through. This is not an easy process, especially for public sector entities where you're somewhat hamstrung by policies and procedures and laws, and there's certain things you can do and can't do. So all that is recognized, and with that, I'll go ahead with some of my comments here. But some of the questions here is, what are the opportunities that we decide to pursue? Which ones do we think are good RFPs and good opportunities to bid on? And what we've seen, regardless of whether it's public sector or even in the commercial sector, are those RFPs or those solicitations where the customer will identify exactly what the issues, problems, and challenges are that they face. Really, what is the situation that you're trying to address and the problems that you're trying to solve? And more importantly, have you articulated a vision to solve those issues and problems? And I know that sounds simple, but a lot of times it just gets broken down into, hey, we need a new spend management, a new e-procurement system. And that's kind of an all-encompassing statement, but specifically, what works and what doesn't work. And that's good to know for any of the suppliers that respond to that, because that's really how we're going to frame our response. We want to make sure that we can solve the issues and problems that you have. And when you establish those goals, it would be really nice to be able to establish them in some measurable fashion. For instance, if you're talking about, workflow, the ability to pass requisitions, purchase orders, invoices through the system, what are the issues you face? Is it a matter of how many you get through, the time it takes to do that? So basically, give us a general idea about, what are the goals that you have related to that. If it's about cost savings and visibility, tell us exactly what you need there, because that way we can craft a solution that meets those challenges. And I think the other thing I want to make sure is we also look for opportunities where a customer truly is looking for innovation and even possibly a transformation of their existing environment. Because the reality is, with technology today, it changes so rapidly. You really could have enhancements to a solution, 6, 9, 12 months down the road that are dramatically different than what you have today. And you need to be poised and ready to receive the benefits of that additional technology. So the whole concept of change management and transformation, I think, is also key. The other thing that we look for is, has there been a champion in the organization for this endeavor? I think that's critical, because without that, I think that you lose some of the focus, and it takes me back to all the original comments that I made, is that champion would be able to articulate the vision and the goals and basically tell the organization, what the end state should look like. And I'll give you a quick example of kind of how not to do it. This is, one of these things where none of this was done, and I won't name the organization, but I will tell you that it was a state government, and they released a voluminous RFP that was basically focused on feature functionality. They awarded the contract to a cloud-based SaaS provider, but they couldn't come to an agreement on the terms and conditions, and eventually the procurement was thrown out, and that was after almost a year and a half of pursuing it. Opened up another procurement with very similar requirements of the original one, selected that same vendor again the second time around, and then still couldn't come to agreement on the terms and conditions, and ended up throwing that procurement out. So at the end of the day, what happened there was a tremendous amount of money that was wasted by the state, tremendous number of man hours and money wasted by the suppliers that were responding to those RFPs, and no one received any value from that. So a better articulated RFP would have solved a lot of those problems and would have addressed the issues, well before they became issues.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Colin, some perspectives that you might have?
Sure. And I echo a lot of what Andy said, and I'll be brief. From my perspective and what I've seen, there's the good and the bad of, I've done many technology providers to the public sector, and you don't really get a luxury of not responding to RFPs most of the time because they're just not that many in the opportunities, et cetera. And it's a limited scope of who you work with. But having said that, it does, what really plays a role is not so much the response, it's the excitement. It's how you feel about the response, what you put into it. It does have an effect when you look at, as Andy mentioned, an RFP that's voluminous in regards to technology, et cetera, versus an RFP that talks about these are our problems. These are what we want to change, what we want to achieve. These are things that we ultimately want to transform to. And oftentimes that may be baby steps, as far as the e-procurement and procurement offices themselves, many are still in that baby step stage, and there's nothing wrong with that. But from my perspective, it's more about not so much what you respond to, it's a level of excitement. I'm not saying we necessarily put less into one that we're not excited about, but it does make a difference in how you respond, what you respond with. So, when I look at RFPs also, there's got to be a good fit. Oftentimes, point solution RFPs, for instance, when you're just looking at sourcing, we may or may not respond to depending on the size, but that's because maybe we don't feel like we're going to be a good value to that organization. So the only time I say we don't respond to something is when maybe it is more of a point type situation. And that is we just don't want to waste the customer or prospect's time because we don't feel like we're going to be able to compete and ultimately be of value to them. Next one.
Thanks, Colin. Eliza, can you share some perspectives you might have?
From a public point of view, the electronic procurement is still new for the governments I work with, not because it hasn't been popular on the commercial market, but it is mainly because these who were doing it early on, they were pushed to start on electronic procurement because of a difficult fiscal situation. So these were the governments who had to save money. So from European perspective, it's Portugal, Italy, Greece, the governments who had to save, who had to change their public finance management, being put through very deep deficit in their public spending. So these governments, they have taken the early risk of taking on e-procurement solutions to modernize the function, to deliver public services, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to do it. So from our point of view, we see that early starters, they are now benefiting from quite advanced systems, provided that they have paid attention to getting it right in the first place. And what we see as a very important thing, it is starting the electronic procurement project with a clear idea what is the problem to be addressed. I'm working at the moment with about 20 governments on electronic procurement reforms in general. And even if in theory the policy, the economists, they tell us that you do use digital technology in procurement to drive efficiency, but to enable the open and innovative government, what it means in practice, it is to translate your requirements into how you want to achieve transaction efficiency, whether you want to have more transparency and better performance of your procurement function, and finally, whether you do care to innovate because this is part of your business or you don't. And this is the problem that we face talking to our government clients in the first place, when we have to ask them, what is your policy agenda, what you want to achieve, and be honest about your starting point. So we have to be prepared to talk to the government that is overambitious or is too cautious about approaching electronic procurement as such. And we also have to bring in the understanding that there are no good halfway measures. So either you go electronic and you re-up the benefits of this process because you you were brave enough to go for the full digital public procurement cycle, or you will end up with a mix of online and offline procedures for a very long time, which will be very difficult to overcome, and you will end up with a need for rethinking the whole project in 2-3 years, because you can't actually manage the process efficiently doing it as a sort of compromise solution. And finally, what we see as very important to the governments we work with, it is to being prepared to taking the risk of the new approach, because electronic procurement is not the translation of your existing procurement procedures into new electronic process. It is a reinvention of your procurement.
Amen.
And if well, if a government client is not clear on this, it's very hard. So we spend a lot of time discussing the internal processes of the government that needs improvement in terms of compliance, in terms of performance, in terms of institutional efficiency, because this is the key question for procurement. What you want to get right and what you are prepared to change to get it right.
Okay, great. That sets up a very nice and solid context for the deeper dive part of the discussion. So more specifically now, if we focus on the actual RFPs, what makes a good RFP? We've already began talking about this a little bit here and there in the previous topic area, but if we focus more so on how you specifically look at RFPs, what makes for a good RFP? Colin, you already gave an example of of an RFP which may not have lent itself to the buyers and the public organization achieving their goals and objectives. But if we can talk a little bit more about that, and then most specifically, how can RFPs very specifically be improved to better address buyer needs and objectives and ultimately achieve mission outcomes? Andy, do you want to begin again?
Yeah, sure. So let me make some comments, I guess, first about what constitutes probably not a good RFP before I talk about what makes a good RFP. And what we've seen, and again, this is a general statement about RFPs, whether they're in the public sector or even in the commercial sector. But if we see an RFP where there is a tremendous amount of effort and focus on feature functionality, that's at least a yellow flag for us, because that tells us that this organization really isn't looking to maybe transform or adopt new technologies, that they're really looking at doing the same thing they've done for a long time, just putting a new face on it. And like I said, that's a big yellow flag. And also if there's references in the RFP to customizing things to give them what they want, that's another, I'd almost say that's a red flag, to be honest with you, because that again points to difficulties in the implementation and difficulties in the ongoing operation, and most likely the lack of perceived value when all is said and done. And the other is where we see that the goals and the vision, if they're stated in the RFP, maybe really don't match with those requirements. And I'll give you just a quick example of some RFPs that we passed on related to these topics here is, and I actually raised this on a previous session with Public Spend Forum here when I was doing a presentation, and I referenced this, but there was a period of about a week where we received 3 public sector RFPs. And the first one said that they were looking for an Amazon-like experience. And the next one said they were looking for an at-home type experience. And the other one said that they were looking for a combination of both. But then when you peeled back after the opening statement, one of them literally had 350 pages of feature functionality that we needed to respond to. So that told me that really the goals and the vision didn't really match there. So that's probably the key points of what we see are probably not good RFPs and how to turn things around. So what does make a good RFP? And I mentioned it in my earlier comments here. A good RFP really starts with a clear definition of the issues to be solved and what those outcomes need to be. And more importantly, if you can identify what the measurable outcomes should be. Because what happens then is you can really start to qualify who are the best providers and best partners that are in the industry to help you to solve those issues and problems. The other thing is, if an RFP shows some understanding of the current solution and technology landscape that's out there today, meaning that they've done some market intelligence and market research before the RFP is released, that helps tremendously too, because then we know we're dealing with somebody where we don't have to start from scratch in terms of describing what's going on in the industry today. And the other thing, and I've seen this not only with my time at Coupa here, but also in my time with IBM when I've dealt with cloud-based solutions and software as a service solutions, is there is really not an understanding or a focus on total cost of ownership. That in some cases you can have an RFP that doesn't specify the type of delivery method, meaning how the solution is going to be operating, whether it be on-premise or through the cloud. And that really creates issues and problems because you're mixing apples and oranges there. So if you're looking for an on-premise solution, state it up front and have your evaluation go accordingly. If you're looking for a cloud-based solution, I think state that up front and then make sure that you understand the total cost of ownership evaluation procedure that goes along with that. And I think, I gave a presentation one time where I used this analogy, and I hope it makes sense here in terms of good versus bad RFPs. But the analogy was that if someone in a government organization was going to release an RFP and the goal was that they had two different buildings and they needed to transport people back and forth between the buildings. And they released an RFP that basically asked for cars. And then they defined exactly what the cars should look like, the gas mileage, et cetera, et cetera. So they focused on the feature functionality of cars. And at the end of the day, what they would get would be someone providing them a fleet of vehicles where they would have to pay for those, they'd have to maintain those, they'd have to have all kinds of other expenses related to it. When maybe the answer was you gave everybody an Uber app, and then you don't have those maintenance nightmares or the problem of having to maintain a fleet. And I know that's kind of, a dramatic example, but that's really what we're talking about here. You're talking about on-premise software, which is that, that fleet of vehicles versus an Uber type experience where, it's a service basically. And that's what we'd like to see in terms of what's a good RFP is the understanding of, the value that's associated with that service and how you achieve that value and the ability to articulate the requirements to make sure that you do get the maximum value from the systems that are out there.
Okay,
that's
great.
it for me.
So great. So from a buyer perspective then, it makes sense, and I suspect a lot of people do this, that is begin with the problems you're trying to solve, state your goals and objectives and what you're trying to achieve ultimately from the procurement technology buy. Then when it comes time to get specific with respect to the rest of the RFP, so Andy, you mentioned an over pivot on features and functionality, the 350-page example that you gave. In lieu of doing that, what should a buyer be doing? So say I've stated my goals and objectives and desired outcomes up front. I framed it up pretty nicely. Ultimately, then, I need to specify something in the RFP. So what should a buyer take?
Yeah, I think instead of specifying specific features or an actual functional process, maybe just ask for the capability to get to the end state. So for instance, and I'll just give you an example of it, and I'll make it very simple, if it's just creating a purchase order online, for instance, and having that distributed for online approval. You can just imagine the feature functionality that would be associated with that process. When the reality is just state that capability that the system needs to provide and let the solution provider tell you how to get from point A to point B. Okay, great.
Colin, your perspectives?
So it's interesting. When you talk about what makes a good RFP, I'd be curious to see if there's a webinar later of what makes a good responder from the state and local side. But the way I kind of look at it and what I've seen over the last 7 years specifically in e-procurement is one, transparency. The challenge that I think all procurement officers face first and foremost is elevating their position within the states themselves. I don't think they're valued internally as much as they should be or thanked as much as they should be for what they do. It's typically a very much a handcuffed position, especially when it comes to technology. It comes very not even secondary or third to the financial system needs, but it's something that's very critical. and controlling, the spend and, the various valuable dollars the taxpayers have. So the transparency is important. Let me tell you why. There needs to be more trust amongst providers and states, and some of that is on the providers and some of that's on the states. But when I say transparency, I'll give you an example. There's a recent RFP where a Q&A session was open, questions were submitted, and there was 5 questions that were answered. We don't feel like disclosing that at this time. That's not transparent. That's not helping a responder when you're refusing to answer questions because you don't feel like it at the moment. That's a challenge. I haven't seen that a lot, so let me be clear about that. But I really do echo a lot of what Andy says in regards to talk more about what you're trying to achieve. Maybe then try and match features and functions to that. I know that oftentimes consultants get involved and they bring in their own spin. There's been an RFP several years ago that, in my mind, from a business need to technology match, was done extremely well. It was coordinated among several states, and you probably can figure out what I'm talking about. But that one I look back on because it was done well. It said, this is what we want to achieve, this is what we want to do, and this is these are the things we think we need technology-wise. And they had taken the time, and they had a third party involved, and they had actually done a pretty good job. There's one more recently, very recently, as a matter of fact, where I know a consultant was involved, which is great because you need to get help, honestly, most of the time, because it's very hard to do it on your own. But there was a lot of technology just being thrown in as because everybody else is doing it, and not necessarily because that state needs it, or where is that state in the evolution cycle? That's the other thing that's key, is that recognizing and then communicating the RFP. We feel like we are here in regards to the evolution of e-procurement. We're just getting started. Maybe that means starting with sourcing. Maybe that means starting with a basic type sandwich model, whatever that may mean. But the point is that you're starting from somewhere that's communicating where you're at, much more of the environmental, maybe less the technology. So that's where I feel like it could be, improved.
Okay, great. Eliza, what have you seen working across public sector organizations?
Well, looks like I should first start on a comment of what has been said by Andy in terms of public sector frequently seeking new technology tools without a precise definition of the business need. Because here we are ending up in the problem of getting into overprescribed technical specification that go big. So I need to have everything, and I will prescribe everything in detail, and this is gonna end up integrate with my 20 other electronic systems I need to integrate with, up to the stage where level of customization is becoming simply dangerous, because the system will never be built to be efficient and effective. And on the other side, we have the public sector clients which are not confident in their technology knowledge, and they want to trust a big supplier. So they focus their selection on pre-qualification. They want to have as best supplier as possible, and then give this supplier a free rein in the project inception stage to actually influence what they consider their business need. And this goes to the point where you have solutions which are too big for you, and you actually don't need them, and you pay for it because you were led into this by your procurement process. And honestly, when I hear from the government client that they need super customized system, I'm scared, because the best practice is not a best practice without a reason. There's a very good reason why procurement is being done a very specific way, because let's agree, in terms of a process, no one invented anything new for the last 30 years. We are just learning how to do it better, quicker, more efficient, and more reliable. And that's it. So why we should not acknowledge this? We should be honest about this, that we are improving processes, and the tools we buy to improve the processes, and we have to understand that market practice in the private sector is born from the market experience, not from overestimated expectations, how safe, how comprehensive, and how pretty the solution should be to fit the public client. So this is the scenario where we have to be clear that buying a solution for the public sector doesn't mean that it has to be very expensive, that it has to be serving all purposes immediately upon launching, and that this solution will not grow. Because if your organization is not prepared to grow, solution will not be pushing you to do it. It will be blocking you in your efforts to change your organization. So in terms of how not to do it, it is one of these cases where overprescribed technical specification has cost UK National Healthcare System 250 million over 7 years and has been scrapped because the process was so prolonged that technical requirements which have started the whole thing, they were outdated before they made any conclusion how they want to serve the purpose on a national level. So we see a huge value from starting to be realistic about actual business needs, going small, and innovating in terms of starting to think what may work to improve my specific purchase need. So this is something that we have learned very painfully with a number of governments, that you have to be prepared to start small, provided that you take the perspective that your solution has to evolve to fit evolving needs of your public organization. Otherwise, you will end up in spending so much money on the solution which is obsolete the very moment that it's actually deployed across the organization. And finally, the problem that we see with the approach, it is that focusing on technology is emphasizing automation of the activities, while it's very hard to automate a process that hasn't been standardized. So and this is unfortunately the tricky part about public procurement, because no matter how detailed the legislation is, if you don't answer a simple question, what we do here and why we select method, it's very difficult to find a technology solution that will help us to do a better job. And finally, what we have found as a good practice, it is that it is an understanding that at the heart of each e-procurement solution are actually three things. First is care about user experience in terms of accessibility for procurement officers and suppliers. This user experience matters very much. The second thing is modularity. If you build your solution using Lego building blocks, you are more likely to succeed, because when you will test the approach, you will see that some of the forthcoming blocks should be different. And you have time to adjust, and you don't overspend, and you build a solution that is flexible. And the last thing that we have learned about successful implementation, it is openness to data exchange. Interoperability and integration has always been a huge problem. So these have to be addressed in the first place. If you are buying a public procurement solution that is supposed to serve bigger organizations, is supposed to be integrated with e-government solutions, or to provide support to large organizations from city level to the national level. this is something that is true across every single country I have worked with. So for us, this was a lesson to be critical, reading requirements of our government clients in terms of how much technology they want compared to how much improvement they want. And getting this balance right and addressing the needs of the user is perhaps the most important thing we have been through with our successful countries.
Okay, great. Thank you, Eliza. There were some really rich perspectives being provided by Andy, Colin, and Eliza. I just want to remind everyone that's listening in that we will write up the key takeaways of this panel discussion, topic by topic, so that you have that available as a reference afterward. It's obviously challenging to memorize everything right as we discuss it, but there's so much rich information here that's being presented that we'll write it up and have it available. So we've been talking, oh, and one more thing. I imagine that a lot of folks listening in have some questions. We'll try to set aside about 5 minutes at the end for a Q&A at least on 2, maybe 3 questions, time permitting. So we'll do our best to accommodate that as well. So if we move on to the next topic, and so now we're going to talk about a little bit about the procurement process more broadly, centered around buying procurement technology, of course. So we just finished talking, for the most part, about the RFPs themselves. I think we went beyond that, which is good. But if we can then talk more broadly about the procurement process, the key issues that the experts that we're speaking with today face in the public sector as part of the procurement technology buying process. So more broadly than the RFP, that is, other things that come to mind. Andy?
Sure. So, after the discussion here, and by the way, I agree with what Eliza said. If you look at, the last 30 years, the basic functionality of procurement hasn't changed. It's really the technology around that. And I think that feeds right into this topic, which are the challenges in public sector and the process that's needed to make sure that you can start to acquire the proper technology. And a lot of this is easier said than done. I get that. I stated early on here that I clearly understand in the public sector, the existing policies, procedures, the mandates, laws, at times don't allow for innovation or transformation. Those things are changing. In the federal government, I know there's some legislations that recently passed there that's moving things in a different direction. So a lot of this is not going to happen overnight, clearly understand that, but there are some things that can be done now in the procurement process. And one of the things I would state up front is do some homework first as part of this process. Before you come out with an RFP, review what's out there in the marketplace today that's available to you. The industry analyst reports, as I mentioned, if you Google available providers, you can start there and build off of that and get a thorough understanding of, what's available in the marketplace today and what industries are saying about those solutions that are available to you. I think the other part of this is that before you embark on the actual procurement process, make sure you have a thorough understanding of the legal and contractual issues that you may face, especially when you're moving from an environment where you're not used to engaging with cloud-based solution providers. The terms and conditions typically are different than you're used to, but make sure you get that understanding up front. Otherwise, it could create problems on the back end. And I would say, more importantly, be open and flexible. You'd be actually surprised at what's available from a technology perspective in the marketplace today. At the end of the day, the processes are, going to be very similar. It's how you get from point A to point B. So I would say, as part of your process, make sure that you have, as part of the initiative, that you are looking for something that's new. Don't try to put a new face on an old technology. Or more importantly, try not to take that new technology and make it fit into your world, because it may require some change. So you need to be willing to make that change. I'd steer clear of areas around customization or even that thought process of customization, because you really lose value when it comes to that point. And I've stated this multiple times, but the part of the process that seems to get lost a lot of times is that ability to articulate the exact goals that you're looking to achieve and the measurable results that you'd like to see, because where that helps everybody in the process here is that, one, you've defined things clearly up front, and then it allows you at the end of the day, when you have that new solution up and running to see have you really accomplished what you wanted to do, and have you provided, your taxpayers with systems that are beneficial for them. So, just kind of in summary, it's really, look for new innovation, because the reality is that you, your employees, and more importantly, your suppliers want this new technology. It's going to help everybody out in the long run, and at the end of the day, you'll see cost savings and better operational improvements with that. So, but the number one thing that I see, overriding this is really do some work up front and steer clear of potential problems as you move into the procurement process, and it'll make the whole process quicker, easier, cheaper in the long run.
Okay, great. Thanks, Andy. And actually, I think it's a good idea to basically wrap it up the way Andy just did. We can talk about Colin. We can hit on the challenges, and then the 2 or 3 key recommendations that you have, which is topic 5. But I think it's a good way to just wrap it up right here with summarizing the challenges and the 2 or 3 key takeaways that you have, Colin. Colin, are you on?
My apologies, I was coughing. I didn't want to cough in everybody's ear. No, a lot of great points from Andy, and and there's been a tremendous amount from Eliza. And when I look at challenges in public sector and what I face, it's funny because in the time I've done state and local and higher education and even K through 12, I have actually found the procurement office across any offices almost just about to be the most accessible. So to talk about challenges, I look at it more again as the same pains I think they have, we have. And what I mean by that is that as they develop the RFPs, oftentimes, there may be legislative items, et cetera, that are handcuffing them, for moving away from bad process potentially, and the time and effort and even the potential of even changing those can be very difficult. So there has to be some middle road. And I think that's where there has to be more communication. Obviously the RFP has to happen. As somebody who has actually been involved in a solicitation that led to a large cooperative opportunity for e-procurement, I get how great that was then. I look at it now realizing that the needs for e-procurement is really individual to each state because they're all mostly in their own maturity. They're all mostly in their own legislative or even procedural restrictions, et cetera. So even trying to piggyback off of any sort of cooperative may not be the best idea. Because then you're losing out on those conversations with the various providers, like Andy and Coupa, myself and Evalua, other providers that exist out there, to understand, the different perspectives, and then be able to take that back, and then evaluate that internally and then put out a solicitation based on what they feel like, what they've learned. And sometimes I'm just talking to providers that are specific to public sectors, talking to providers that also deliver to other industries to understand procurement as a whole. And so it's not so much a challenge of, I think it's we need to work together more. There's been too many failed e-procurement projects because I think there just hasn't been enough communication, ahead of time because there's this need to feel like you have to go get it and make these procedures, et cetera, fit that, and at the same time, it's on the provider such as myself. To understand when we're not a fit and walk away and not make it more difficult for the entity that's made a decision, right or wrong, whether you like it or not. And so the one challenge I would put out there, a recommendation, is if you're going to go out and do a e-procurement solicitation, as time consuming as it may be, it will be worth the effort to spend the time with 3 to 4 providers, different providers. And they don't have to be necessarily those who provide specific public sector. And then take time internally to evaluate and learn and see what you want to do, what steps you want to take. Maybe you bring in a consultant, maybe you don't. But also, I'll put a challenge out there as well. Not so much a challenge, maybe something I wouldn't mind seeing to help us. And we're sitting here talking about, feedback to public sector in regards to RFPs for procurement. I would think it'd be great to see something similar coming back, maybe sponsored by somebody like NIGP or Wisconsin ASPO, et cetera, in regards to how can we be better responders? How can we be better at responding to solicitations? Maybe not providing the thump factor, see who can provide the biggest binder or something along those lines, but get some feedback coming this direction as well. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Colin. And yeah, I think that's a great point. Ultimately, the goal here is to share perspectives in both directions. So I think a good natural, one of the many other themes that we can hit on as part of this webinar series is exactly that. Get a public sector viewpoint in terms of what they see when they're trying to buy procurement technology and how in engaging with suppliers, it can be a better experience on the buy side as well. So absolutely, I agree. Eliza, would you like to lay out a couple of 2 or 3 key recommendations to summarize your perspectives that you shared?
Looking at public sector challenges, we need to be honest that it is mainly hard because political accountability is making things difficult. So decision-making process is heavily affected by things that business doesn't face, and this creates an attitude to be risk-averse and keep on the safe side. And unfortunately, when you want to be on the safe side, you may simply overpay and end up with the solution which simply does not respond to your current needs because it has been overestimated or is simply outdated. What we have seen working and as a good solution for public sector problems, it's actually starting from small value contracts. Starting with if the government in a local municipality, in the region, or on a national level doesn't have experience and capacity of running electronic procurement as such, it's much better to start on solutions for small value contracts which are offering basic functionalities on a high volume of transactions, because this is a good testing ground. And what is also difficult, being afraid of political accountability makes public sector to go for complex solutions. We see frequently that it's very difficult not to be afraid of making a solution easy. And this is also pushing for opting to buy well-established, expensive old technology. So what we try to do with our clients, we try to work with them on recognizing the value of a pilot, of going for low-value procurement, for using easy solution, and giving an open door to experimentation, because if you don't experiment, you will not innovate. And I know that it sounds horribly difficult to put into the public sector context, but it's possible. One of my most successful projects, which is now operating 20,000 contracting entities, has been born as a civil activist IT design using latest technology and untested approach to data exchange, and turned to be good. And you see the success quickly. These guys, they put a pilot on the market which cost on a national level roughly $50,000, and within 3 months they had exactly 1,000 contracting entities who tried it, because it was for very low value contract. And since this pilot demonstrated that there must be an idea that works for this government in it, they spent another $500,000 to roll it out as a fully fledged solution for the national level. And today, 18 months after invention, they have 1 million tenders, 200,000 suppliers registered, and about 30,000 contracting entities using it on a regular basis. Still, it's not a complete solution. It's work in progress. So if I would like to pass a message to you, it would be go small, go easy, and don't be afraid to pilot and experiment, because a huge part of solutions, no matter whether they are electronic procurement or e-government or open data, they will fail. But if you spend relatively little money, you can afford this. And this may pay off in a long term because you are also learning. I have learned lots working with these civil society guys because they have opened my eyes to a number of questions I have never asked myself. Never. So this is the value of taking a new look at the problems which are not new, because we have procurement process regulated as it is regulated for a while. However, here I think we have a first beacon of change, because what we have observed is that actually legislation is changing and is opening door to more flexible and easier approach to public procurement compared to what we have seen 10 or 15 years ago, because we are now benefiting from this reinforced messages from the success stories. If it can work in a very challenged country, and if it can work large scale, why it shouldn't work in Germany? It should. So people take this, and what we have observed, and I would like to share with you in particular, is to see how open data concept and open contracting concept help us to solve interoperability problem. Open data hasn't been invented to help suppliers talk to each other or to help databases to talk to each other. It has been invented to publish information that is prescribed by the law to be public. But what we have learned in the process, it is that this approach saves a lot of money and makes things easier. So try it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Some very, very good perspectives. In wrapping things up, since we're right about out of time, I do want to acknowledge that a common question that often comes up is, in general terms, how do we do market research to better understand the supplier landscape? And more specifically, even beyond that, how is it practical to effectively administer market research by having preliminary discussions with suppliers and not give the perception of an advantage to those suppliers once the RFP is issued? And that's a very common theme in the public sector, by the way. Let me first begin by just reiterating that we have a couple of tools that might help on the front end of that process, and that is around a couple of things, actually. Number one, we have a market intelligence brief that we put out, which is available on our website. It's the Public Procurement Technology Landscape document. So you can reference that on the website. It includes hundreds of suppliers. It references hundreds of suppliers and what their capabilities are, how they vary. The front end of the report is obviously the value of procurement technology within public procurement, but ultimately it helps you understand how suppliers differ in terms of their offerings. Some are broad-based, some are very niche-focused, so it provides that starting point there. I realize we're about out of time, but I did want to point out one other thing, and maybe we can then get some perspectives from maybe Andy and Colin. But very shortly we'll have an online directory of procurement technology suppliers available in the coming months. It'll consist of hundreds of suppliers with their more detailed capabilities broken out, and it'll enable buyers to filter the list based on select features and capabilities of these suppliers. So that'll be coming down the pike in the next couple of months sometime. So these are just examples of a tool that's readily available, the Market Intelligence Brief, and one that's coming down the pike. We are out of time, and it would be nice to be able to pose this one question. If some people want to stay on, I can pose the question to Andy and Colin in particular. How do I, as a buyer, engage with suppliers as part of market research and not look like I'm providing favoritism before the RFP goes out? Andy, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. And I clearly understand the issues related to this question in terms of fair and open competition. So I think part of it is one of the ways that you can solve from spending a tremendous amount of time and effort on this is to do some research up front and identify the suppliers that you want to have dialogue with. And I think one of the questions up front was, how do you do that? And I've stated a couple times here is go out to the industry analysts that are out there. Gartner, IDC, Forrester, and for that matter, Public Spend Forum. look at the folks that understand this marketplace and let them tell you who would be the most likely candidates to solve your problem. Then reach out to those. And the way you have to do this is provide everybody with, equal time, so to speak. Give us, if it's, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever, give everybody the same amount and prescribe exactly, the type of dialogue that you anticipate so that it doesn't appear to be, an unfair competition, let's say. And I think what you'll find from that is, one, you'll learn a lot, and two, hopefully it'll drive questions that you didn't think to ask. And then at the end of this process, you'll be able to, identify what fits and what doesn't fit. And and not everybody is going to be that perfect fit for the requirements that you have, but at least it gives you a general idea. And then maybe from there, if you still need to go through a full and open competition from a RFP perspective, you'll have a different you will have a different perspective on what to include in that RFP when looking for your supplier.
Okay, great. Let me open it up. Colin or Elisa, anything to add to that?
I just had a couple things to add really quick. One, just say who you met with in the RFP. That's, again, transparency. Say that we've met, or just say you've met with various e-procurement providers. And then if in the Q&A says someone asked, be open and transparent about that. Because if you've met with several, there can be no perceived impropriety, no leg up because you've met with multiple providers. If somebody unfortunately has an issue with that, that's an issue of theirs because you've taken the time to meet with some providers. The other thing I might add to that is create your own RFP. Even if you want to get help from a consultant, et cetera, that's fine. Be careful with that. Great example of recent RFP that was released where the author of the requirements was left inside the document. Ultimately that was fixed. But again, it lends to most of us are in public sector for a reason because we've built relationships over time. It's important to have those relationships because you want to know who you're working with. And so we also know who our competitors are, what they do, who they work with as well. And so being, again, the transparency aspect of it, working on it on your own, and as a provider myself, obviously it's great when it's written to where it looks like it might lean towards me. But, at the same time, I don't want to encourage that. Because the ultimate goal is to solve a problem, to solve an issue, and not to create any challenges for yourself because I know that my, peers will know that. And so transparency.
Okay, great. Thanks, Colin. Elisa, anything else to add to that?
Well, a most useful piece of advice I can give to US-based public sector clients is to talk to open contracting partnerships. These guys, they work on agenda of benefiting from open data throughout the public procurement process. It's an NGO foundation based in New York, and they do a lot of research which we can hand to you for free, and it can inform your understanding about your own business needs. We have found it very valuable because the perspective they have is to look how much transparency you have to provide to the process as a public sector and how much you can gain from being so transparent. And I have found it very useful. So talk to them. I understand that they run a number of mini projects, testing ideas in several municipalities all over the country, and have an open contracting org web page which is collecting good experience. And for my work, their inputs, they were extremely valuable.
Okay, great. Thank you, Elisa. One more comment in regards to the supplier directory for procurement technology providers. Raj, are you there? Are you available to comment?
Sure. First of all, thank you. This was a great discussion. I think exactly. I know I learned a lot. So thank you to everyone. I was just going to say that the supplier directory, you can request it. Any government official can request it at protech@publicspendforum.net. We will make it available. Our online tool is coming together as well, but we can also make it available in the meanwhile. So just let us know if you are in the process of doing some market research and looking for that information.
Okay, great. Thanks, Raj. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and I want to thank our panel members, experts on the public sector and public procurement in particular. This was a very rich discussion. Again, we're going to summarize the key takeaways throughout this discussion and make that available on our website, in addition to this recording as well. So thank you again, everybody, very much. By the way, I realized that we went over in time, but I just, since the vast majority of participants hung in there with us, I thought it was useful just to close out with these last couple of points. So thanks again to all. I really appreciate it. And please do stay tuned for continuing webinars in this series on how to buy procurement technology. Thank you again, everyone.